So I'm a bit of a hoarder. I absolutely hate throwing away or getting rid of anything, especially anything that has writing, and especially anything that's any kind of record. I especially love like cultural and religious history. I'm not really interested in things like wars or events, but I really like reading about the lives, biographies, and diaries of random, everyday people. I think that that's very interesting. And so, because, I also happen to used to have extensively documented stuff, I don't do this kind of screenshotting so much anymore. But back in like 2020, I did it all the time. And every now and then I like to go back and look back and see what I'm doing. And it turns out that as much as I often think that I'm changing as I'm getting older, it was more or less the same old shit. So, I'm making a video going into it because, I don't think that it's my business to decide what is and isn't going to be entertaining for people. It's like old Pokemon cards. They're rare now because people just kind of got rid of them without a second thought. And I could have started this video back in 2018. I mean, I have a little bit of stuff. I have a chart, and, this is a lot of where I'm getting my information. Of course, I did not read everything on any of these charts, nowhere near, and some of them I probably read none of the things on the chart, but, it's still an indication of what I was interested in. But back in 2018, for the most part, I just wanted to, like many budding Satanists, I just wanted to listen to shitty music and play Magic the Gathering. But about, 2010, that was the start of this YouTube channel. Or at least when I started uploading stuff to it, not 2010, 2020 was roughly the start of this YouTube channel, as far as I can tell. And it was actually supposed to be an erotic novel YouTube channel. I was going to be reviewing classics of erotic literature and talking about what made them good and whatnot, like what separated a classic of erotic literature from everyday smut. And honestly, I don't know. I just try to read whatever is as disgusting as possible at this point in my life. But as to what makes a classic, I can't tell you. But other than that, normal 4chan stuff, I was interested in drugs. I never do drugs. I don't drink, and I'm a virgin, and I'm a Satanist. But you meet a lot of Christians where they talk about, I used to be into all that kind of stuff. I was doing drugs, and I was addicted and stuff. But then I cleaned up and became a Christian. I decided, I don't want that to be me. So I don't touch drugs at all, and I already read the Bible at this point in time. I was obsessed with Thomas Aquinas, which is a famous medieval Catholic theologian and philosopher. And that's when I started really getting into philosophy, and partly because I felt a need to sort of refute Catholic ideas, to have an actual argument as to why I am not a Catholic. And, I was really into Lenin. I've always hated Marx. Well, I haven't always hated Marx, but I've tried reading him. I just can't. I don't like being told about a theory of value. I don't like anybody suggesting that value is based on anything other than what I happen to want to buy. And my favorite board on 4chan was X and Paranormal. And, I'd already been starting reading weirdo books with squiggly letters and books on magic and stuff like that. And I talked about drugs, but I'm terrible at chemistry. I hated science. I don't like science. I had to take chemistry twice. I just study alchemy because alchemy is like chemistry, but it's based in red elixired. And, you can do more stuff with it. I would rather have a very small chance of becoming immortal than, I don't know, knowing whatever beryllium is made up out of. But anyway, I can still turn cough syrup into gold. And I was, don't think that studying, I think I was kind of a Catholic at this point. I don't remember very well. But anyway, I was a Catholic in the French manner because it did not stop me from reading weird erotica. And indeed, I think I never read City of God. I read a few pages of it, and then I had a physical copy, and it went in a box that I was keeping the Lord of the Rings in with it, and it is the heaviest box. But I was also doing research on fetishes. I was going into image boards for fetishes, and I was keeping track of what I saw. And this was part of a research project, and this is something that made me feel productive. And I was doing satanic stuff. And, at this point, I think this was when I first heard of Nick Land. I started looking into cybernihilism because it sounded really cool and aesthetic. Though, again, anti-science, I prefer fantasy stuff to that sort of thing. But yes, the year afterwards was when I started really getting obsessed with Nick Land. Not actually reading Nick Land, but reading all the books that would read up to Nick Land. I even wanted to go to the University of Warwick because that was the university where Nick Land went to. Again, mostly for aesthetic reasons because I thought it was cool, but I hate Hegel. I wanted to study Nietzsche, so I was thinking, well, do I want to learn French or German? I learned French. To this day, French is the only language that I can really read in comfortably. I also learned Norwegian. The only phrase I remember how to say is skep du selv, which means kill yourself in Norwegian. And that's a very helpful thing to know. And I was also really obsessed with a book called Public Opinion, just a book about how public opinion is formed. I didn't have a bed or any furniture at this point in my life, so I just kind of had a pile of blankets on the floor, no pillow, and I would be up reading at 3 o'clock in the morning, propped up against a wall and desperately trying to find a comfortable reading position. And my political compass at the time reflects that lifestyle. But this is when I documented, I started reading the more type of books. I think when I went to Job Corps, which was like a trade school that my parents wanted me to go to, and some of the books I carried with me was Hobbes' Leviathan, and I think that I had already had some Nazi books. I wasn't a Nazi, but I had them because I thought it was interesting. And there's a Celtic paganism reading list because I was also interested in paganism. And I have a picture of a man who is performing an exorcism on the Loch Ness Monster. I was still trying to avoid eye contact with women. This is when I got into skepticism, which is still my favorite Greek philosophy, and Buddhism, which I hate Buddhism. I don't like Buddhism. Still listening to shitty music at all times. And this was when I also started a 5-year-long obsession with Schopenhauer. I learned German just to read his books. I would read his books every day. And eventually I would read every book that he mentioned. I actually started making a list of every book that Schopenhauer had mentioned in his works so that I could fully appreciate them. And I guess part of, why I'm doing more ancient and medieval stuff now is because just after the Schopenhauer experience and after being like, Schopenhauer's philosophy actually has some pretty major problems. You start being like, well, I've decided that Schopenhauerianism isn't really true, and so I don't know what deciding to focus on this so much has really done for me. Like, when I'm studying things like Christian philosophy, Islamic philosophy, Jewish philosophy, at least when I'm done with it, I can say, well, I'm not Jewish, I guess, and I, put a lot of thought into it, but if I decide that I'm not an existentialist, it's, where do I go from there? But yes, I never read a lot of these books. I did read part of Mein Kampf, and I used to sit in my dorm, with my roommates, and I would read Mein Kampf out aloud to them. And I would wait and see how long it would take them to recognize what I was reading. But Mussolini said that Mein Kampf was a boring tome that he himself never read. And yeah, it wasn't, after the sort of initial fun wears off, I did read The Doctrine of Fascism at one point, though. I read a lot of Italian stuff, to be a hipster. Everybody likes Germany, but nobody's interested in Italy. And I hate Hegel, and I hate historical speculation. I don't like using history. I like history, but I like it it's more about not thinking things than it is about drawing conclusions or talking about the direction of history. I don't like postmodernism anymore, but mostly because I just feel like it's an unnecessary pain in the ass. And anyway, throughout this whole time, my thing is still interspersed with Bible quotes and filthy, horrific pictures and satanic imagery, and that never really left. I think that I was still kind of a Satanist as a Catholic. I don't really know what I was thinking. I thought of God as being like Cthulhu or whatever. I was like, man, I really want to see that cool Cthulhu shit. And I also started using Audible primarily for books because it just makes life way easier. And my job, I've had the same job. 2020 was when I got that job I have that I just read audiobooks all day. And this was a political compass then. And, I eventually did read some books on logic, but I still have a long-standing hatred and distrust of logic, especially since getting into Catholicism. It was mostly supposed to be from an analytic, logical philosophy type perspective. And I guess I just kind of got the sense that logic was this kind of magic that led people to really, really weird conclusions. Christian cereal. This video was a lot longer than I thought it would be, but and I never script anything that I make. All right, bye.